COVID-19 has brought the healthcare industry to a critical point in history, and we're moving away from the traditional hospital care, and we're getting into personalized medicine, and it's been a buzzy word. It's been such a buzzy space in the startup landscape. So what's exciting to me here is today is that women-led startups are driving the future of health tech. So it's really amazing. And it really actually honestly makes sense because 90% of women are in healthcare, are making healthcare decisions in their families, and doing 80% of the household healthcare spending. So, but the irony here is that women are notably underrepresented in digital health entrepreneurship. So we still have a long way of closing the gap. But today I'm really excited to have 3 women entrepreneurs who are pioneering digital health. They are 3 gregarious, gritty, gracious women entrepreneurs pioneering digital health on our panel. So it's my honor to invite them up on stage for this up-and-close personal discussion. I will first introduce a graduate of MIT and electrical engineering and computer science. She originates from a family of women role models who are highly academic, and she is a 3rd-generation professional woman in her family, originating originally from Bangladesh. She's worked in tech and now digital health for the past 16 years. Her recent passion and startup is Amelia Virtual Care, and it offers virtual reality platform for mental health professionals. Her startup is designed to improve the patient experience, clinical outcomes, scale, and revenue for providers. Please welcome the CEO of Amelia Virtual Health, Afsana Akhter. Is that
yes,
right?
Yes,
okay,
thank
Afsana
you. Happy
Akhter.
to be here.
Thank you. And now we have the founder of EMR Data Cloud, and she considers herself as a young serial entrepreneur. Am I right? And she's trained as a biologist with a focus on clinical research and oncology. She began her journey into entrepreneurship while in medical school, where she made many of her vital personal connections. Her company, EMR Data Cloud, is founded to optimize clinical efficiency, provide faster diagnosis, reduce the environmental impacts of laboratory genetic testing. She will be acquiring a doctorate degree in just a few months, congratulations, as a naturopathic medical doctor. So please welcome to-be Dr. Kiana Ruch. Our next panelist is trained in physics and neurophysiology and pediatric epileptology. Make sure I say that right. While running the pediatric epilepsy program at UCSF Benioff, a children's hospital, she grew frustrated seeing no significant outcome in over 30 years. She noticed while other diseases had data to make critical decisions about diagnosis, such as cancer and diabetes, there was no such thing for the management of epilepsy. So on a day-to-day basis in the clinic, she grew frustrated and disillusioned because of her patients' lives as they were in a black box. Impassioned by this, she founded Eysz with the goal of using patient-generated data to transform the outcomes of people with neurological disease, starting with epilepsy. So please welcome Dr. Rachel Kuperman. Thank you. All right, so really awesome to have you guys all here.
Thank you.
So looking forward to this lively discussion. So I wanted to step back a little bit and sort of take a 30,000-foot vantage point, kind of look at the big picture. Women entrepreneurs face challenges that maybe men never experience, and balancing family and life can be a challenge. Can you sort of go into, in general, what are the general challenges that women entrepreneurs face?
Who wants to start?
Yeah, anybody can start.
I can get us going. I think, and I'll speak just generally in my career again. I'm very grateful and fortunate to have had the opportunities that I've had and the mentors and advocates that I've had. A couple of things that that I started to face later in my career as I started to advance into more senior roles was, I just, consistently being underestimated and having to prove myself over and over again. and I don't mind the work. I love, you know, the intrinsic satisfaction of getting results and achieving results, but it still surprises me when I'll do something and people are surprised of what I've done. And it doesn't even hit me at first, but then I do feel that there's this underestimation, and I have to keep proving myself over and over again. So I try to mentally prepare myself for it, but I still get surprised.
Afsana, may I interrupt?
Sure.
Could you actually first speak about the business model, and each of you too as well? Tell us, because your product, so people can put that into perspective as they're listening to you.
Yeah, sure. And so at Amelia Virtual Care, it's a SaaS platform, and we sell it as a recurring revenue subscription, a subscription model to providers. They pay per license to use our platform, and then they can use that in patient care. They can get reimbursed for it. It helps their practice scale. And so it's wonderful that we can both help with patient care as well as helping the practice grow and be more efficient.
Two important features, definitely what providers look for.
Yes, and then so there's that side of it, and then there's the, you know, as a CEO entrepreneur, you have to raise money, you have to lead a team, you have to help win clients and all of that. So I will say that. And you mentioned one thing about my background, which I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or later, but I will say this for a lot of women in the workplace, in leadership and generally, they feel a lot of guilt in advancing in their career. And I really do feel that I'm fortunate in that having very strong professional, both my mother and my grandmother. I hear stories of my mother not even taking maternity leave. I don't know how she did that, and I have a daughter, and you know, I did all that, but I feel very privileged to have been able to work the entire time. Sure, I took maternity leave, and I don't feel that guilt. And so my message to women is, it is very much about perspective, and it's a privilege to be able to set that example for our daughters and our sons and our children, and show them that women can be everything that we want to be, and it's important for them to see that. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruch.
Thank you. I think the one thing that consistently comes back to me is not only being discounted for being a woman, but being discounted because I am young. I started my company when I was barely 23 years old in the throes of COVID while completing medical school. And without any funding, we were able to build a HIPAA-compliant platform that's integrating complex test orders that made history in healthcare. And doing that with Charm is incredible. And looking at my peers still in medical school, you know, we're using my software and I'm saving hours of time for all of my peers every week, and it's free to healthcare providers, which is great. So I was really solving my own problems. But looking at just the specific issues I face as being a woman, there's this double bind in business where you can't be beautiful, pretty, sexy, and smart. You can only be one or the other without not being taken seriously. And the majority of decision makers in business are men. And I think we're in an era where that's beginning to change. And men don't realize that, most men don't realize that we have two X chromosomes.
None of you guys here, of course.
Just saying.
I just wanted to add to that, again, I think it sometimes translates to like VC funding as well, right? I mean, a lot of the VCs are often men and not women, and so the amount of funding that women are, not that men won't, but it's sometimes the perspectives. But Doctor, and we'd love to hear your business model if you just want to quickly just dive into that.
Yeah, so we actually charge labs a subscription fee per month to use our platform to connect to providers. It's a flat fee up to 5 accounts, so 5 different clinic connections. Above that, there's an additional fee for each new account added, but it's completely free to healthcare providers. Labs love it because they get all of the paperwork that they need, perfectly done by a computer. Providers love it because we've taken the order process down from 35 minutes for complex testing to less than a minute.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Kuperman, you, when I spoke with you first, I noticed that you come from a slightly different perspective. You've always been in like classrooms with women are the minority and at the top of their class, you said. So I'd love to hear a little bit of, do you disagree or do you agree? How has your experience been?
So I think you can tell that things are still unequal, mostly because you don't see that many women, and the women you do tend to see tend to be very successful. So when you see lots of mediocre companies run by women, I think the answer is we made it, right? Because we have just as many mediocre companies as we have mediocre male companies, right? So we haven't gotten there yet, right? I think you'll see that many of the female-run companies tend to be more capital efficient, they tend to get further on less money, and I think that suggests that there's still some bias present, right? That the mediocre companies are not able to get there just like the male mediocre companies.
It's such an interesting point because I think that's what it is. Like, I think when women get more pushback, you know, when they're trying to get funding, and so they need to prove themselves a little bit more. So by the time they're actually there, they're receiving, they don't have as many holes in their business model or whatever it is, and so they have like revenue building startups, right, that are highly more successful than, like you said, there are not as many mediocre. So yeah, we need to see more mediocre startups.
That's right,
I think
that's the goal,
absolutely
more
right.
mediocre companies run by women. So I'd say another perspective is there was a great study put out by Harvard Business School on the questions women entrepreneurs get asked as opposed to the questions male entrepreneurs get asked. And you know, this honestly happened to me like 2 weeks ago, so I was like, oh. And it's, the questions tend to be very defensive questions. So I pitched to an angel group, and I was invited to pitch. That was kind of the key point of this conversation. Invited to pitch to the angel group, and the first question was, why are you pitching to us? There's so much money in California. I was like, because you invited me to pitch to you. But I can tell you that the tenor of the entire conversation was different then, right? The tenor of the conversation was, you defend your choice and your inability, whether or not you had an ability to raise money. You defend that right now, and that's the first question we're going to ask you, right? So it's very hard when you're fundraising to kind of overcome those kind of direct, like, you're kind of uninterested here. Why are you pitching to us? Kinds of questions, and you know that's obviously a really horrid example of it. But it comes in other forms, right? There's many more subtle versions of that type of a question that really it's hard to kind of. You know, and I've read the article, I tried to turn the negative defensive questions into positive questions, but it's exhausting after a while. Like, it just takes a lot of effort, and then it takes a lot of emotional effort, right? I can tell you my husband got an earful after that pitch. I was like, oh my God, wow. So, you know, I think that that's one of the big challenges in the space is how kind of exhausting it is. And, you know, like my patients, I care for a lot of people with rare epilepsies and heart, you know, really chronic, challenging diseases. And what they describe as kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts. And it's that feeling like it's nothing, you know, it's like going to JP Morgan and standing next to my co-founder, who's my COO, and people addressing questions to him, and he's like, no, she's the CEO. And then they turn to him and ask him some more questions. Like, he's like, no, she's the CEO. And so it's that kind of like, yeah, I know you're not quite there yet, and maybe you're not comfortable talking to me, maybe I'm too short to be a CEO or whatever, but you know, there's just this kind of exhaustion about it that you have to overcome.
Absolutely, and I agree. I think there's like decades of old notions of male and female roles that's contributing, even though all the research is showing women provide fresh perspectives, they lead amazingly well, they're great in crisis management, and often very empathetic. And so all the research, no matter how much research you put out there, it's going to take time. It's going to take time. So I'm going to, again, put a question back to all of you. What do you think we need to change these misconceptions? I mean, these misconceptions are, we're in the 21st century and in a very advanced digital age. So what needs to happen?
It's so many things. It's systemic change, right? And so I think in the home, it needs to happen in the home, and it needs to happen at a macro level too. You know, I very openly share this. The one piece of advice I got from my mother was, you know, when you choose your mate, pick somebody whose mother was a professional, because they will have grown up seeing the mother in a professional role. And so when I see my classmates leave their jobs to stay at home, I'm like, look, I get it, it's your prerogative, but just remember what your kids are seeing every day, and that it's important. It's imprinted in their brain. So I think it needs to happen in the home as well as in the workplace. And we women have to. Everybody needs to lift women up, the men and the women. We can't just rely on women lifting women up, because there aren't enough women to lift other women up. So it has to be the men as well. Some of my best mentors and the folks that have advocated for me the most were Caucasian men, and I'm grateful to them. So it just needs to happen all around.
Thank you.
One thing that consistently is a theme across, the gender gap in employment is pay, and I think starting with even corporate salaries, making sure that you have an equal number of female and male execs, and that pay is distributed accordingly, because women do get paid less. My sister works a corporate job, and she has male colleagues that work the same position that do get paid more than her. And consistently, she goes back to her management and asks why. They do have the same education, and it is just a discrepancy that women face. We get paid less. So I think starting there is just a good basis. That, and recognizing female-led companies, but not treating us any different than male-led companies. We don't have a disadvantage because we're female. We actually have an advantage. So just recognizing and appreciating, but not treating us, like we're anything less.
It's definitely multidimensional, right? Go ahead.
So I have a slightly different view. I'm tired of being mentored. Like I'm happy to take advice, but it seems like in this space, all the work geared towards women is like, we're going to mentor you, and then you're going to succeed. You're going to overcome everything. It's like, enough. Give me some money. Like, I know what I need to do. Like, it's just to this point that it's this burden on women, and then you see, on the other hand, you see these female-led VCs, which are lovely. But you get the sense, and this is me being a contrarian again, you get the sense that they're taking the risk that you're a woman, so then they're not going to take a risk on other things. That maybe you have a little bit more technical risk, or maybe you have a little bit more market risk. So, but their risk is that you're a woman, and they're going to invest in you because you're a woman, but they don't want to see any other risk. Well, that's not that helpful. So it just kind of perpetuates this idea that, that there's a risk associated with being a woman. And I think it's time to move away from that. Let's move away from like this idea that we're just going to mentor the crap out of women to get them to where they need to be, because that's not working.
Dr. Kuperman, do you think like an authoritative first impression coming from a woman is going to help?
First impression to whom?
I guess your VCs, your funders, yeah, like if you gave an authoritative first impression, do you think that makes an impact on, when you're in a room filled with VCs?
I mean, I think we all know that charismatic people in the space do really well, right? Charisma takes you a long way. Just look at politicians, right? So I think that, if we see women as charismatic, if we see them as great leaders, I think that does say something. But I don't know. I mean, I don't. It's very hard to look through other people's eyes, right?
Yeah,
to see what
true.
they're seeing.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Ruch, what are your insights on like how you might navigate this like yourself in terms of like your self-talk, or what strategies do you use maybe before a meeting potentially when you're there to kind of, how do you mediate this on a personal level?
You stick to the facts and you don't let anything else get in the way. You go in with a mission and you accomplish it. I like to wear something that I'm comfortable in, that I like. I'm not a big fan of like the navy or the gray suit or the black suit. They just don't make me feel happy. My cat, listens to me talk before my meetings, and she does a great job of giving feedback. We're an all-female household. And yeah, I think just don't discount yourself, and other people won't discount you. Just know what you're doing and be confident.
Great. Anybody else would like to add to that?
I'll add a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I found important is we have to also assess the other side, and we have to quickly put people in, these people trust me, support me, believe in me, and these people don't. And we need to stop wasting our time with the people who don't. Because changing other people's mindset doesn't happen quickly. You try once, twice, but I think key for us, for any individual, but especially us, is identifying those people who are going to lift us up and really invest in those relationships and not waste time or emotional energy for those who aren't there.
That's great advice for life in general. Yes. Honestly, yeah, and I'm sure you learn those lessons really hard in entrepreneurship because it's win or lose sometimes, right? I loved let you all acknowledge that men are sometimes part of the growth process as well, and part of they're not mentoring always, and they have sometimes been those people who have also helped women. I don't want to say helped again. I don't want to use the right language here, but rather kind of, stepped aside so women can kind of show what they have. So that's really nice. So I wanted to we talked a little bit about mentorship, and probably all of you have had both men and women as mentors. Can you speak a little bit about what sort of advice you have received, and maybe the kind of mentorship you yourself have provided to others that have been beneficial that you could let our listeners know?
I'll go quickly. I think what I have learned is that I have to quickly, not just as I said, kind of assess who's supportive and who isn't, quickly assess the environment that I'm in. It's different as a CEO because you get to create that environment to some degree. Not always, there's the board, you can't always influence that. But in a company, when you're an employee and you have a manager and you have other stakeholders, it's very quickly to assess if you're in an environment that's going to give you a fair shot and is going to allow you to grow. And early on, I used to say, okay, I'm going to change this environment, I'm going to prove myself. And now I've learned, if it's not the right environment, just leave, go find a different environment. Because we don't always have the luxury of doing that, but I just learned we can't change our environment, and when we try, it can often backfire.
Dr. Ruch, any specific examples you could share?
Yes, definitely many. My advisor, Dr. Jennifer Havens, has been fantastic throughout my process building my company. Not only is she an advocate for genetics and genomics in medicine, she also has a PhD in molecular, so we can nerd out about genomics all day in the clinic. Outside of that, though, every time she sees me, she says, "Here comes boss lady," and anything I need, she's willing to help. And from day one, she's been fantastic. But outside of that, I've had so many mentors building my business, and everyone has given me advice, and you take some and you leave some. But you're always grateful, and you always have to see why they're giving you that advice as well, because they have different experiences that you may have never had, and learning from them through those help you to avoid failure.
Dr. Kuperman, you've also been affiliated with several different organizations that have provided sort of a network for you as well. I'd love to hear about that.
So I was part of the Fairland Fellowship, which is part of Fogarty Innovation, which was really kind of in situ helpful mentorship. I think, just to take a step back, I transitioned from clinical medicine to entrepreneurship, and I was a leader of my department, I was an expert in my field, and then I'm a novice, right? So to suddenly go from being, an expert to a novice, it's a bit of a, you gotta eat some, little bit of, it was a very humbling experience, right, to enter entrepreneurship. And one of the things I found was that I thought medicine was very collaborative, but actually, the space is extremely collaborative. And the networks and advice I've gotten from people have been amazing, and honestly, much more than I ever got in medicine. And one of the best advice I got, I remember saying, coming from medical school, I'm like, well, what's the book? Where do I start? Show me the textbook that helps me understand this. And I was actually pointed towards the NIH I-Core program, which is a program all about products, market fit. And it was really an eye-opening experience, because here is the expert. I thought I knew what my patients needed. I thought I knew what the space needed. And I didn't. It really had to evolve quite a bit to get to product market fit. And really, ultimately, the best mentors were, just the ones that told me to go out and listen. And really kind of change my mindset. And there were just a lot of little pushes in that direction as I entered the space.
Yeah, you had mentioned in our initial conversation about how one of your friends had shared with you about Post-its. And he had you put Post-its around your name, and it was about your network. Can you share a little bit
Oh
about
yeah,
that?
so actually it was one of my iCore mentors. He said, okay, well, your name, put a Post-it up with your name in the middle, and then put all the people that you've met in a circle around you and categorize them by, what their background is, how they're helping you, and then you can see visually where you have holes, or where you need to build up more, or where you have getting kind of too much advice from, and you really be able to transfer some of that into something that is just a little bit more actionable.
Visuals are awesome, aren't they? So talking about visualizations, I would love to talk about money a little bit. So when you guys are trying to sell your company, do you kind of feel like it's a little bit cheesy, like to get up there and just like, I need money? Like, how do you do it? What do you do? What do you say? What's your strategy?
I think for me, I've always tried to work in products or areas where I have conviction, because I also come from a sales background, and I feel that if I have conviction for what I'm doing and selling, I think that's kind of the foundation of it. And then beyond that, I try to lean a lot on data, right? But also stories. For me, I'm an engineer, so I always lean more on data. I'm trying to do more of the storytelling. I think, but it is the other thing I will say is what investors want over time also really changes, and we're seeing that now. The economic environment for fundraising now is so different from what it was 6 months ago or a year ago. And I think that is tricky to figure out. I have not worked on the investor side. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I wish I had, because then I'd be able to really know what they want
so
and go with that.
So do you think actually verbalizing it is how you need to frame it is different than it was 6 months ago? Your story is
I think the criteria. What I'm hearing is again more the desire for more efficient growth versus growth at all costs. More sort of sustainable companies getting to profitability faster. Mm-hmm. So I think it is, the growth is still desired. And at times, I've had investors say, they want the aggressive growth, but with conservative spend. I'm like, yes, I get that, but there are laws of physics.
Definitely, when we were at the start of COVID and all the funding going into this, and now where we are today, we've seen a decrease in VC funding, right? Now the question is, they still have the money, it's just that they're not putting it in. Is that right? Is that what you all feel about it?
I believe so, and I think that the decision-making criteria is changing. There's more conservative, so people that were investing for an ARR of 1 to 2 or 3 million now want the 5 to 6 to 7 million. So there's a lot of hedging going on, and there's a lot of delaying going on. My hope is that, just as it did at the beginning of COVID, everybody kind of went into a funk for 3 months, whatever, but then people kind of woke up and said, okay, life must go on. So that's my hope. Others?
Dr. Eysz, is there something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so one thing for me, when I sell my product, I typically don't because I'm a terrible salesperson, but my salespeople are excellent. And because I'm a terrible salesperson, I had to build an excellent product that sells itself. So I actually don't feel bad at all when I'm trying to pitch a VC, because if I had more money, I would put it in my company. It's a straightforward business model, and we had a revenue-producing beta with very limited capital raising resources, and every time that someone signs up, we're increasing access to excellent testing and making everyone's life easier, so there's really no downside, so it's pretty easy to sell.
I'm still figuring it out. I think so, in our space, I'm currently, we're working towards our first product deployment, which will be at the end of next year. I think being able to tell the stories, having a clear clinical need. The challenge is really in market and getting buy-in that the initial market is sufficiently big to really warrant investment. I think there's a bias against neurology, honestly, because of, there's a track record of failures in the space and over-promising, and I think being able to show traction with very little money is a challenge that we're trying to overcome.
Do you think some of the issues are that providers in general are reluctant to take upon new technology? Is that part of the reason why funding is reduced?
So Well, you know, I think it has to do with the generic space versus the drug space, right? So sorry, generic versus brand, right? So in certain spaces like multiple sclerosis, the drugs cost a fortune, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So even though there's 1/3 as many people with MS as there are with epilepsy or another neurological disease, because the drugs are so expensive, there's a perception that it's a larger market. And so it's, I think, and then the other aspect is, you know, neurologists are a crotchety bunch of doctors, which you may have a sense of, but we're not the cowboy cardiologists. And so I think, you know, one of the things you hear from neurologists is show me the benefit before I change my practice, as opposed to other specialties where they may be willing to risk, you know, figuring out the benefit for themselves. They want, you know, the evidence really front and center, and sometimes unrealistic, right? So we just completed a clinical study where we showed that doctors had a sensitivity reading of EEG, electroencephalogram, of roughly 88%. But if you ask a doctor what sensitivity they want for a seizure detection device, they say, well, I want 100%. I'm like, you're not 100% sensitive yourself. Like, so, you know, these are the kinds of challenges that you have to overcome in terms of really defining the clinical need.
I think that also speaks to like the kind of storytelling you have to do with the VCs, right? Sometimes you need to like talk about, inflate your stories to be able to get the money, and there's the reality of it, and then there's the story, right? And so it's quite interesting how it all plays out. Right, so thank you, sorry. All right, so moving on, I actually wanted to get into execution and in setting up your digital health company. How is your product unique and super sellable? Like, how do you make your product unique? How do you differentiate yourself and make it sellable? Especially now, because there's so many products out there. I'm sure you've seen it in virtual reality. I'm sure there's like similar devices. How are you presenting yourself, differentiating?
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, you know, the approach I take to that, and that question always comes up, is my primary focus, the way I think about it, is delivering value. Delivering value to the stakeholders, the provider, the patient, whoever's paying for it. And I think if one maniacally focuses on that, either solving a problem or creating value, that is paramount. Then the question is, how are we doing that in a way that's different from others? And
you able to share an example, Afsana?
Yeah, sure. So for example, we have this, so one pain point, and this ties it to everything, you know, therapists see patients, and then they ask the patient, okay, practice this when you go home. And then the patients struggle to practice it, they don't do it, it's hard to do mindfulness, relaxation, meditation, right? We created this feature called homework, where the therapist can assign certain VR sessions as homework. Very easily, people can do it on their mobile phone, and it's guided meditation, mindfulness, relaxation. And something so simple ended up being so valuable because it's a real pain point, and it helps create scale because now that patients can learn these skills on their own, maybe they don't need to come see the therapist as often. And that doesn't mean less revenue for the therapist because they have this whole long waiting list of patients waiting to see them. So it allows for a more scalable model, combines self-care with clinician-driven care, asynchronous with synchronous. So those are examples of, yes, it's a differentiator, but we didn't say, oh, let's build homework because it's a differentiator. We said, we want to solve this problem, add this value, and it ended up being a differentiator. So I like to think about it that way, whether it's right or wrong. I want to fundamentally deliver unequivocal value to our customers and our stakeholders. And then I will look at it and say, what about us is different that allows us to deliver greater value?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, if there are providers in here, I'm assuming someone in here has likely filled out a lab order or an imaging order with a pen and a few pieces of paper before and then ended in fax. We eliminate that completely, and our only other competition at this time you actually have to download a different browser to like run your EHR and like drag things out. And as an EHR user who orders laboratory testing, I'm not going to download some browser to order lab tests. The nice thing about our software that differentiates us from that competition, our pricing is monthly, it's lower. You can use whatever browser you want. You can use Windows, you can use Firefox if that's still a thing. You can use Safari, whatever you want. And you get to just do your normal workflow every day as a provider, eliminate the paperwork, no weird browser. You just keep going on with life as usual. And that's what differentiates us from our competitors. We are seamless in the lives of providers.
Dr. Ruch, just a quick question, follow-up question. Have you ever needed to, I'm sure you have, can you share an experience when you needed to pivot because you needed to, offer more value? Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm a genomics nerd at heart. I was an author on the Human Genome Project. I have been annotating genes since I was 18. My co-founder and I actually met in academia, and he built my genomics databases for my soil, and then I kind of pimped him out for 7 years, and he did it for free, and then I hired him on for my company, so I'm finally getting him back for that. But we wanted to do whole genome sequencing for germline testing into the EHR, completely seamless workflow, everything off the sequencer into the report, into the provider's EHR, updates on the raw data. We realized that that whole sequencing part and all of the tech to actually get through that's FDA regulated, and we didn't have funding for that, and we said we're just going to do the reports to start and we'll build on it later. And we're still getting all the data and parsing all of it, so that's excellent. But it was one thing that would have cost us probably 10 to 15x on startup costs had we done the sequencing pipeline. But great opportunity for us, we still built it, we still have it. So when we do have that funding to put it into action, all of our labs are already asking for that, along with the LIMS system. So I think those are the next two things we'll probably build.
Dr. Kuperman, you yourself are a doctor. You're dealing with doctors constantly, but when you presented your product, tell us how you needed to pivot as well. And you are a doctor, selling to doctors, so has that proved to be an advantage to you in any ways?
So just to take a step back, as a clinician, there is so much clinical need out there. I mean, there are so many unmet needs for patients. The problem is that many of them really aren't businesses, right? That you can't actually, given the current healthcare system, make money filling this unmet need, right? And that's a little heartbreaking as a clinician, trying to navigate that. When I think about, I think it was a bit of a reality test for me to go out and really do a lot of the customer discovery, because many clinicians were really very frank with me, which I appreciated, which was, listen, if I don't get reimbursed to do it, I don't care if it saves this patient's life. Like, I need to get paid to do the work that I do. And it was, very eye-opening and appreciated to get that kind of feedback. And I'll give you an example. So I cared for children with rare diseases, right? And that's a really challenging space. And there's currently billions of dollars going into gene therapy development. The challenge in the gene therapy space is that they have no way to measure outcomes. These kids are many of them are developmentally devastated. And so the standard developmental assessments don't work. Well, our technology could be used in that space, right? We could use our technology to support the development of gene therapy products. But how do you create a business plan when the study has 15 patients in it, right? How can you, yes, there's an enormous need, but there is no viable business plan that I can see that could support the development unless the pharmaceutical companies want to share some of their profits when it comes to the drug development. So, being able to separate that, gosh, there's a really big clinical unmet need here, or, there's actually a business unmet need here, and can we viably fill it? Well, we're not a not-for-profit, right? I mean, so it's a big challenge, and it's something that, I'm continuing to wrestle with.
Right, definitely a reality check. Building trust with doctors is often difficult, right? Just really quickly, before we move on, is there any tactics that you use to be able to build those tactics? To build the trust?
For us, yes. I mean, our product is used by therapists and their staff, and so our best salesperson in the company is a therapist. She's our VP of Behavioral Health, and she just she's very talented in that not only does she use the product in her own practice, but she's able to articulate the benefits in a way that other people can understand it really well. And I've seen it working in digital health, it really helps to have, like people selling to like people. So if you're, when I was working in a diabetes company and we were selling into primary care or payers, having people from that environment, having clinicians speak to the benefit of it is really helpful. And then just testimonials and case studies, really bringing to life those stories that are backed by data and having those kind of very outcomes-oriented stories and case studies is very effective.
Yeah, that's really interesting because of the three here, you are an engineer and the two of you are doctors, so it's really interesting. And later on we'll talk a little bit about your hiring and how you hire based on who you are. So we'll get into that shortly. But before we do, we are getting into our quick fire round and you will all be led into and
wow.
We will do a short few-minute round, maybe 3 minutes, quick-fire questions to get to know you guys better. You will have 1 second to reply. And what I didn't tell my panelists yesterday was I told them they're allowed to, thanks, Megan, that they were allowed to skip, but I'm going to tell you right up front, you are allowed to skip one question only. All right, describe your startup in 2 words.
Virtual reality.
Awesome genomics.
Transform neurology.
Transformed neurology?
Transform neurology.
Transform neurology, awesome. Go ahead. One thing you'll tell your 18-year-old self.
Start exercising.
Slow down.
Just take care of your mental health.
True. What business do you wish you had founded?
That's a tough one.
You can pass the mic and come back to it.
Let's do that.
Cat cafe.
Epic.
Not CharmHealth?
Actually, I was having an idea today as I was listening to other panelists, and I wanted to, create an app that helped women increase their confidence and self-empowerment.
Nice. And what excites you about being here today?
I mean, I think it's just being together in a room on a Saturday. People that are here on a Saturday are really committed to improving healthcare and to working together to improve it. So congrats to you all.
Hearing about new innovations has been really exciting.
Meeting the ladies out there.
You wouldn't be the same without.
Oh,
You would not be the same without.
Oh, that's the.
My parents.
Sure.
Coffee.
100% agree, my parents.
Never leave your house without.
My phone? How bad is that?
Water.
My wallet.
All right. How do you deal with stress?
Meditation.
I like to golf.
Yeah, running and meditation.
Right. How big is your team?
We have 60 people at Amelia Virtual Care, mostly in Spain and a growing team in the US.
So,
9 full-time, 2 contractors, and 1 cat.
5 full-time and 2 part-time.
when you think of a successful entrepreneur, who do you think of?
Give me a second.
That's your skip?
My father, even though he's very blue collar, very hard worker, and self-motivated.
Yeah, I will say my grandmother, she is an OBGYN, and I say this story, she was married, she's Bangladeshi, she was married at the age of 15, had 5 kids. She graduated medical school the same year as my mother, who was her daughter, but she is an entrepreneur because she started her own clinical practice, and it was fully cash flow positive. So I don't always think, I think of her as my grandmother, but
Nice.
she was an entrepreneur, and I have to give her points for being a role model there.
What's non-negotiable when you start a business? What's non-negotiable for you?
I think being able to stick to my core ethics and beliefs.
I'm going to skip this one.
I think creating a honest culture where people can speak their mind and give feedback is core to what we're doing.
And what would you rather do? Speak every language there is, or talk to animals?
Sounds like a game.
This is a game.
I think speaking every language.
Yeah, you can all
Really
just,
powerful.
probably your voice is audible, you can just shout, you need to pass the mic if you don't.
Animals.
Animals?
I would say language, because now that I work with so many team members in Spain and I don't speak the language, I definitely feel the absence of that, and I wish I could I wish I could understand them more easily.
All right, characteristics of a successful entrepreneur. Starting with a C.
Starting with a C?
Mhm.
The word has to start with a
Yeah.
confidence?
Great.
Cool, calm, and collected, and likes cats.
I can say grit, but that doesn't start with a C.
The C silent. All right. All right. Describe in one word what it is you do not want in your hire. Reflect on an example.
I think attitude. I mean, from a culture standpoint, that we want to be able to have open conversations, and bad attitudes are
Mhm.
problems.
Someone who isn't very succinct with their email communication and they send you 4 paragraphs and you're still confused what their ask is, give me bullet points.
Yeah, I think this is a hard one, but you're saying what we don't want
Yeah.
in a person, right?
Yeah.
I would say lack of integrity.
All right. Finally, what character trait would you attribute to your success?
For me, it's determination.
Yes.
I am unstoppable.
I think a certain amount of obliviousness is really helpful in this space. Just to be able to not, take everything personally.
All right. So thanks. Let's give everyone a hand. Thank you so much. So let's get into the hires. So what has been your go-to strategy in how to hire? Can you reflect on an example of a hire that did not work?
Yes, hiring is really tough. And even when you think you've made the right hire, you may find 2 to 3 months down the line, they're not everyone's surprised, or you're surprised, they're surprised, and it just didn't work out. So I've had the best luck with people I've worked with before, because you just really know the person. It takes time to really get to know a person, their work styles. I think everybody can show their strengths in an interview. They know what their weaknesses are, they can mask it. But my best hires have been people that I've worked with before. And yeah, I just think it's really hard. I've made a lot of hiring mistakes, and I keep trying not to. So.
Hire very slowly with lots of people in the interview process besides yourself, and fire very, very quickly.
So we're an early stage startup, and there's a certain amount of discomfort that comes with finding your niche and business plan, and a certain amount of jack of all trades, so to speak, that comes with the people you need to hire. And so I think the one failure we've had with the hire was really someone who just couldn't wallow in the uncertainty and come out with their head on top, which is part of the challenge of the startup space.
In one sentence, can you describe what you expect to see in the next 5 to 10 years in digital health?
Integration.
All right.
yes, fast integration.
I think there'll be consolidation of companies.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We are just about the end of our panel, so I really wanted to thank you all. I don't know if we have time for questions. Do we have time for questions? We do not have time for questions today. I'm so sorry, but this has been a wonderfully delightful, inspirational panel. You know, it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg that said, "Women belong in all places where decisions are made." So you guys have been inspiring, motivating, and informational, and for not just for women, but for everybody out there who wants to explore entrepreneurship. You've spoken about your unique journey, talked about VC funding, execution of your startup. Thank you so much for your fresh perspectives, incredible wisdom, and all the insights that you have given. And I look forward to seeing where you guys are going to take your startups. Thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate your
Thanks for having us.
participation.